Hi, this video is about interstellar travel, or how to cross the vast distances between the stars. One way to cross the distances between the stars with humans is called the worldship. Worldships were introduced in 1984 by a paper by Alan Bond and Anthony Martin. Worldships are essentially huge spacecraft. They travel self-sufficiently between the stars for thousands of years. They house lots of people, so more than 100,000. And they travel at relatively modest velocities of less than 1% of the speed of light. But this is still like over 200 times faster than any spacecraft that has been launched into interstellar space, such as the Voyager 1 and 2 spacecraft. Bond and Martin proposed two different types of worldships. The first worldship type is the dry worldship. Inside its habitat, you would find land, small mountains, fields, forests, etc. People would live as they would live on Earth. The second worldship type is the wet worldship. Inside its habitat, you can find a kilometer-deep ocean and people would live on small islands inside. You can see from that scale that both worldships measure between 200 and 300 kilometers in length, the size of small countries. Both worldships are propelled by fusion propulsion. Large hydrogen bombs would be dropped from the back of the spacecraft, detonated, and the shock waves would then propel the spacecraft forward. Why did they propose two different types of worldships? The reason is Bond and Martin imagined that worldships would not travel on their own, but they would travel in fleets, and each worldship would represent a different feature we would find on the surface of Earth. How would the interior of a worldship look like? Maybe something like this. This is an image from Dandridge Cole's book Beyond Tomorrow. It shows a vast cylindrical structure and people are living at the inside of that cylinder. Gravity is generated by rotating that cylinder and light is provided by this huge light bulb in the middle of the cylinder. Can we actually build a worldship? We know from Earth that we can build closed environmental habitats in which people can live for maybe a couple of years. This image shows the Biosphere 2 habitat, which was developed in the 90s and which housed a couple of people for 2 years or so. So the question here is, can we scale this up and put it into space? But in principle, it's possible to build these closed habitats in which people can live for extended periods of time. Now, other feasibility issues for worldships are actually a little bit less intuitive. The first one is maintenance. Think about your laptop or your smartphone. They're probably prone to breaking down after a couple of years of using them. Now think about a worldship which is millions or billions of times more complex than your laptop. Somehow you need to repair the worldship during its trip. And for repairing a worldship, you would need by itself, again, a very complex system, which might include these so-called wardens, which are like robotic repair probes. Obviously, we don't have such a system, to the pity of our laptops and mobile phones, but certainly for a future worldship, we would need such a system. The second feasibility issue has to do with money. Humanity today is simply not wealthy enough to fund a worldship. We would need to boost our economic capacities by thousands of times of current levels that we can actually fund and finance a worldship project. And this might still be hundreds or even thousands of years into the future. Now, a third feasibility issue is actually inherent to crewed interstellar travel itself. If you look at this chart, which depicts mass against trip duration, you can see that warships are actually at the extreme end of things. They are extremely heavy and they take thousands of times to travel between the stars. Now imagine that meanwhile we get certain other types of technologies running, such as hibernation ships, where people could just sleep their way to the stars. And these ships would be much lighter and would be much quicker than world ships. Or just even imagine these embryo or brain emulation ships, which we don't have now, but once we would have them, they would have a drastically lower mass than even the hibernation ships, and they would have trip durations of maybe decades to maybe 100 years. So once these technologies come online, why should we actually invest all of the money into world ships? And we could equally spend that money on these other technologies and launch many more people to the stars. To summarize, the only in principle feasible way of transporting humans to other stars we know of today are world ships. And we know it's feasible because we can, in principle, build these closed ecological systems in which humans can survive for maybe a few years, and the question is, how can we scale this up? However, we have feasibility issues such as maintenance, making sure that the worship doesn't break down during the trip. And today we are far away from actually funding a worship project. Humanity would need to be thousands of times richer than it is today. And finally, the biggest threat to worships might actually come from the technology itself, when in the future we might have much better ways of transporting humans to other stars, and these might render worships ultimately obsolete. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.